chosen by God. And that's important because church leaders can't decide, I'm going to become a leader under God anyway, and then start politicking and jockeying to become a leader. It's not the way it's done. That's not the way it's done. At least, no, sorry, that is the way it's done. But that's not the way it's supposed to be done. It is God who appoints leaders. And I deal with the whole business of being in a position where God can appoint you. And I also deal with what happens if God does not appoint you and how we can address ourselves and how we can address the work that God has called us to do. It is important. Leaders must be chosen by God. Lesson number 2, church leaders must walk in integrity. And these are actual slides from the beginning. You know, if you're not willing to follow leadership, and if you've lived a life where you have disdained leaders, you will never make a good leader. You have to follow leadership. And no matter what your position is, you can be the presiding bishop, and you still have to follow leadership. Because the presiding bishop has a board that he must deal with. It doesn't give you a get-out-of-jail-free card. You have to operate. Now, I find in the PAW, that's a major problem. I have run across pastors who had zero respect for those that they lead. I've seen pastors who had disdain for those that they lead. You can't lead a person that you don't like, that you can't stand, that you can't tolerate now, or ask God to give you a new heart. It's important. You'll never lead successfully if you disdain the people you lead. Number 5, brother, church leaders must exercise self-discipline. You can't fly off the handle because something goes, making up stories, folk. I was in a church one time, and the head deacon came in to talk to the pastor about a crisis that had developed in the church, and the pastor blamed the head deacon for the crisis, and the deacon said, well, no, pastor, I had nothing to do with that. In fact, to be honest with you, this is the result of the decision you made last week, and the two people got into an argument after you announced your decision, and that argument accelerated. He said, but it was not a good decision, and here's why it was not a good decision. The pastor got up and cold-cocked that deacon and knocked him out. Knocked him out. I mean out. They had to call the ambulance, and he was transported to the hospital by ambulance with a major concussion. That pastor hit him so hard, knocked him, I don't mean knocked him down, knocked him out. He was out cold. Now, the pastor is awaiting trial right now. As we speak. I talked to him just last Friday night. He's awaiting trial. Because the member, while he was gracious, his family pressed charges. You can't do everything you feel like doing. As a leader, you can't even say everything you feel like saying, even though it's right. You can't say it. You gotta learn some on all these. Church leaders must exercise patience. Wait upon the Lord. I don't need to say anymore. Church leaders must be students of the Bible. Slides from this principle, because I want to kind of walk through them with you just so you'll see what the slides look like, and because I'm going to talk about that in just a few minutes. But let's take principle 8. The next few slides will be to become conversant in its practices. We must acquaint ourselves with the narratives contained in Scripture. The more knowledgeable of such patterns we become, the more conversant we become in the application of Scripture. Since we were not here during the formation of the church did not begin with the New Testament. To truly understand the mind of God in the creation of His church, our biblical exploration must start where the Bible starts. The first verse of the first chapter of the first book of the Bible sets the premise for the existence of the Bible and the existence of the church. Consequently, every verse of every chapter of every book thereafter builds upon the unfolding theology of Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. The text declares the preeminence and the sovereignty of God to the point that everything else about God is based upon his authority of such performance and his right in doing so. The fact that God was in the beginning demonstrates his superiority over all persons and things. Anything else. He shares time nor space with no entity outside of himself. His right and authority cannot be